research execution. So, I will put a massive disclaimer on this. If you are a freshman in high school, you probably don't know some of this. By the time you're a senior in high school, you've probably been exposed to a lot of things about how to conduct strong research, going through credibility, going through how to log it properly, all of that. Some students may find use in this, some others may not. The biggest thing with research execution when I was creating the script is I have specifically targeted it for the new digital age. I feel like a lot of students struggle to conduct online research because schools still teach how to do very by the book, library, database-based research. And while that is the gold standard, that may just not be an option. And I have modified these teachings to accommodate it. So, in this video, we're going to go over how to gather strong evidence and to conduct research that actually informs the decisions you make in your project. I'm also going to cover secondary and primary research, how to run research effectively, and then how to make your sources trustworthy. I will have a worksheet that I describe a little bit more later, but one of the Go for Glass cheat sheets, one of the first things we did last year when we got started, is I created a pretty in-depth explanatory cheat sheet for about 30 different types of primary research and 30 different types of secondary research. And I will throw the link to that in the description of this video. So in case you're ever wondering what the different types are, we have a resource for that. It won't be covered in the video, like specific types of primary and secondary. Okay. Getting something clear right off the bat. You're going to be sick of me saying this by the end of the video. Not all data is created equal. And in fact, the quality of your research is going to depend much more on how carefully your evidence is chosen rather than how much you collect. You don't need 200 survey resources if they are shallow and biased. At that point, 30 would do just fine. You're going to need useful evidence, which actually tells you something you don't already know. In research, in academia, we call this best evidence. But what does that mean in practice? It means that your research is relevant, actionable, and reliable. In short, it should always tie back to the questions you're trying to answer. To break it down a little bit more, relevancy is actually addressing your learning objective. For example, let's say I'm trying to understand how ADHD students are interacting with productivity apps and why they're abandoning them after just 1 week on average. So I might look at data relating specifically to the ADHD experience, motivation spikes, burnout patterns, overstimulation from interface clutter, maybe even the experience with the apps they do use on a more frequent basis. Data that was just looking at how all students, regardless of neurodivergency status, how they use their phones, that would not be relevant. You can use it for like background information if you wanted to look at a comparison sort of way, but it wouldn't be used for your argument at its core. Reliability basically says that my data is not a fluke, it's a pattern. If I'm getting feedback from 3 people that they hate the font my website uses, I'm probably going to brush it off. I'm not going to change it. But if I get 12 out of 15 people I surveyed on my website design and they're all saying that the font is difficult to read, at that point, I'm going to make a change. And finally, we have actionable. And actionable is just saying, okay, this is something we can look at and there's tangible proof and evidence that makes us say, okay, because of this evidence, because of this proof, we're going to do this other thing. For example, if we have tangible proof that ADHD users are consistently dropping off on our app after logging in, we might decide we have to simplify onboarding. If that doesn't work, maybe we say we're going to add a progress indicator so that they can actually see how close they're done or how close they are to being done with a tutorial for onboarding. The best way to see if your evidence is best evidence is just to ask yourself, if I had to explain this to someone who disagrees with my argument, would this data help me persuade me or help me persuade them? If it's a no, it's probably not good enough to include. Doesn't mean toss it out. That's great to have in your back pocket for later. And on that same note, a lot of students seem to confuse a lot of data with good data. I've seen so many ORs specifically where they are pushed full of research and there's not a red thread. There's not a singular theme or pattern or flow to it. It feels like they're just putting in every single thing that supports their argument and they're failing to make it cohesive. So let's talk about primary and secondary research. Before we even begin gathering data, we have to decide what kind of information we want to collect. And that begins with the classic split. So here's the pitch. I'll do two of them. First up is primary research. Primary research is original. This is something that you're creating. You're going out, you're collecting it yourself. As an example, say we're designing a new flashcard app for students who are studying DECA. We do the following. We run an interview with 10 students on why they delete study apps. We run a survey asking what features these students would prefer to see, or what features do they actually prefer on the apps they do use. And then we watch someone use our prototype app for the first time and take notes on where they're getting stuck. That is primary research. It's great for specific identified problems and outlined audiences. Secondary research, though, is already out there. Someone's done all the work and you're analyzing their research to learn from them. So here we might say that we're reading an article on gamification and education. We're looking at the usage statistics for leading companies like Quizlet or Anki, or we're pulling up stats and we're pulling quotes from an ADHD research database on focus and retention, or we're looking at how many students in DECA have ADHD. All of that would be secondary research. So the reason why we split it is so we can be strategic. Primary research is great when you have a problem that's already identified or your audience is niche and specific. Once again, if we're designing with DECA students in mind, we probably are not going to find a lot of public data because they're minors and it's DECA and it's a non-profit high school competition that's just not going to have a lot of research into it. On the other hand, secondary research is great for zooming out. Maybe we want to understand how motivation works in these learning environments. Maybe we want to see how other edtech profits or nonprofits have scaled up. The great thing here is because we're not having to reinvent the wheel, someone else has already done that work, we're building on their insights. And that is why secondary research is great for broader trends. It's great for establishing norms. It's good for understanding the wider context before you immediately dive headfirst. And on that note, I swear by this. Start with your secondary research and then your primary research. It's kind of like prepping for a job interview. I'm going to read the company's website first. I'm going to read the job posting. I'm going to learn about it. I'm going to feel like, okay, I understand it. I'm thinking I want to work at this company. But generally speaking, that's not enough, especially if it's a small company and I'm not super familiar with them or haven't heard about them before. I'm going to go talk to somebody who works there. Or I'm going to reach out and I'm going to start an email chain with somebody who works in the hiring department just to kind of get a feel for the workplace. That right there would be like doing primary research. You're going out and you're doing it yourself this time. So when we are running effective research, once we decide we're going to collect our own data, we are faced with a pretty significant barrier. Primary research can be really insightful, but it can also be super useless, and it's a great way to sink your time into it. So before we write a single question, or we run an interview, or we do a survey, or we do mystery shopping or anything, we have to ask ourselves, what do I want to be able to say with confidence after I do this? The answer to this should be specific and tied to a business decision. If we decide, I'm going to do mystery shopping, I've decided I'm going to do that because it will help me understand how my competitors work. Or I will better understand the CSR program that this company already has, if you're looking, for example, at the FOR project this year. Once again, we could also say, we want to understand why users are abandoning the app after the first login. That's better for a starting point than saying, we just want feedback. Feedback is vague. These learning objectives will help you give your research a target. Next, we want to choose a method that fits our question. So we have that document. I will reference it again. It's linked in the video down below. When you're asking your questions, it's okay if one method is going to answer multiple questions. But in general, you'll likely use between 4 to 6 primary research methods in the final project that you submit. When you are actually completing your research, generally the strongest papers that do super well at ICDC will actually have closer to 6 to 8 primary research, and then they just won't submit all of it. So for the sake of clarity, I'm going to get a little bit more specific. And let's talk about recruiting the right people and think about who counts in our primary research. I've interviewed and mentored a lot of students, and you'd be surprised how many student projects interview some people and then realize none of them are in their actual target audience, or they're not helpful. There is a distinction between the two. Talking to the CEO of a company is super impressive on paper, and we see this a lot in ORs. But unless that CEO is actively involved in the day-to-day, or they're very capable of speaking on the minutia of the company, you may be better off talking to a director or a manager. Also, they'll be easier to contact, generally. The higher up you go in a company, they'll still be able to give data and insights, but they won't be as able to identify the smaller friction points. If you go and you're talking to Wells Fargo and they say you somehow managed to get a meeting with the CEO of Wells Fargo, and he sits down and you're talking and he tells you, yeah, we have a lot of employees that feel like they're not getting promoted fast enough. If that's a problem that's already been identified, you're not gonna beat them to the punch. Part of what's going on with an OR paper, or any other 20-pager, by the way, there's plenty of these this applies to. I'm just using OR for this example. That company likely already has a program to solve it. What you're looking for is those friction points that fits the annual prompt in DECA, but also is a little bit more unique. It's got some meat to it, something you can really dig your teeth into. Higher up in a company is great, but students often ignore the employees. These are the ones who are the most impacted by change or problems. That being said, going back to the idea of target audience, if your audience is niche or hard to reach, don't be afraid to get scrappy. I'm finally coming around to this, but Discord groups, Reddit forums, even friends of friends can be incredibly helpful as long as you're transparent about the context of collection when you present your findings. And of course, that doesn't mean go to r/explain the joke and ask them to take a survey for your ADHD testing platform. That would be a really bad idea. You would go towards r/ADHD students, or maybe you go to r/ADHD, or maybe you're looking up online blogs and forums. Go to places where you're actually likely to find your target market and then take it as a grain of salt. I would never use this as the predominant way to collect data from a survey, but those sorts of things will give you a lot of data, so you might be able to start seeing emerging trends. Just once again, cite it. There are some ways to phrase it so it doesn't sound so, I threw a survey in a Reddit and I got responses. But just be transparent. And don't be afraid also to send emails and cold calls. A lot of students struggle to do this. We have some templates. I might link those below as well. But you would be surprised how many students interact with companies that do genuinely want to help. And they won't know that they can help if you don't tell them that they can help. In the same thread, let's talk about how we record and analyze patterns. Especially in primary research, a lot of students struggle, I feel, to understand the minutia of recording. Obviously, they're taking notes, but not taking good notes. So starting off with interviews, first of all, record them. Always have permission, because otherwise it's illegal. Transcribe them, and then organize them by theme or moment. So you might have one large recording of your interview, it might be 45 minutes long, and then you've got like 5-minute chunks, or you separate it into a bunch of different clips and you organize it, or you tweak it, or you label it. If you don't, you're probably going to forget the nuance of the situation. You're going to forget that an employee lit up when you were talking about a certain feature that you want to do, or they contradicted themselves halfway through a sentence when they were talking about what causes a problem. Additionally, if you observe your behavior and their behavior, keep a time-stamped log if possible. Write down exact quotes if you can. Later, you're probably also going to want to group all responses by patterns. Did 3 different people complain about the same button on an app? That would be a trend. Did a bunch of employees use the same jargon phrase? You may not know the jargon phrase, so go look it up. If it's something that they're constantly using, it might send you down a rabbit hole for research. Behavior isn't generally the most professional thing to cite, but it can give you some insight when you're in your drafting or brainstorming phase into where there could be genuine excitement over a feature or change. Especially at ICDC, where you see industry professionals specifically choose events that are related to their industry when they're judging. These are people who are genuinely interested in seeing the future business leaders of America. These are oops, FBLA. Okay. These are the people who are interested in hearing from new voices. We are an entirely different generation in the way we think than the people who are currently in the workplace. We are so interconnected to the digital landscape all around us. We have research capabilities that probably they wouldn't have even dreamed of as, kids, teenagers, people in college. I go to UW. I have access to one of the largest library database systems for universities, and I use that. And it's so digitized, it's amazing. So, I got a little bit off track there, but utilize the resources you have and analyze them for patterns, and it'll be so helpful for you. Additionally, in the same note of recording and analyzing, this will apply to both interviews and surveys, but many students don't write strong questions the first time around. Your first draft is probably going to be biased, it might be confusing, or it might even be too surface level, and you're not going to gain any new insight from it being answered. Thankfully, there's a couple best practices we can follow there. First of all, ask open-ended questions. Tell me about. What made you feel that way? What do you think about this? The most frequent thing you'll see with interviews, especially if you're interviewing an employee or somebody within a corporate environment, is they are used to being in meetings all day where it's much more back and forth. And they may be limiting themselves. They may be kneecapping themselves to give you a chance to speak. So showing that engagement, showing them, hey, yeah, I'm liking what you're saying, keep going, you're on a great path, they're more likely to get deeper into it. Interviews, for a 30-minute interview, you should have about 10 questions prepared and then rank it in order of priority. Chances are you'll only get through maybe 5, maybe 7, and then that just can scale up or down depending on your time. Additionally, avoid leading language. Don't you think this feature is helpful? Don't you think Twizzlers taste disgusting? It forces an answer and you're not going to get genuine responses. Use follow-ups generously on that same note. Can you say more about that? What happened next? Did you find a solution to your problem? Kind of ties back into that idea of the open-ended questions. And then finally, if you're asking questions with too many parts, it gets hard to answer. If I ask you, don't you agree with me that Twizzlers taste disgusting and Starbucks overprices their coffee? Okay, what if I agree with you on both fronts? That's fine. What if I disagree with you on both fronts? That's fine. If there's any chance, however, I disagree with one and agree with the other, it makes it a really difficult question to answer, and you're going to just lose so much time to miscommunication, or they might just give you the answer they think you want to hear. Secondary research, it honestly gets a bad rep because it sounds like the lazy version of primary research, and it doesn't deserve that rap. Just because you're Googling stuff, it doesn't mean you're calling it a day there. That's why generally you're going to do a lot more secondary research, but you'll hone it down to maybe 3 or 4 different categories of secondary research. For example, interviews in primary research is pretty basic. They're all just interviews. But if you say you read articles for secondary research, your articles are going to cover a lot of different things. They're not going to be limited to just, I talked to these employees to learn about this. They're going to be articles studying ADHD retention, or it's going to be studying app engagement. It's going to be studying industry cases, all of these different things grouped into one little neat basket. So once again, we're going to define what we're trying to find out before we start searching. If you're just blindly searching for something like student productivity, you're going to start drowning in results. So instead, we want to tighten our scope. What's the actual angle? What's the type of data we're looking for? Are these stats, observational trends, market trends, stuff like that? We are also going to want to try breaking our question into 2 to 3 smaller sub-questions at a bare minimum. That way you can get different entry points into your chosen search engine. For example, why do students procrastinate on flashcards can become behavioral patterns behind short-term study app usage in Gen Z. Or it could be app engagement with color sensitivity to engage neurodivergency. The more specific your search terms get, the higher quality your result will be. So, when I was writing the script for this video, I'll be completely honest, I agonized whether or not to include traditional research, textbooks, library, pen and paper. However, let's be real, most DECA students, if they're going to read a textbook, will read it online. I think I have encountered like 4 groups out of the over 100 and something I've mentored over the last 2 years that were doing trips to the library. Because everything's so digitized, there's so many resources. So, if you're going to go online and read everything there, then we're at least going to be smart about our online research. And this is going to be, for the rest of the video, a crash course in how to be smart. So, if you're just typing things into Google and you're clicking the first link, you're doing it wrong. We're going to start with better search operators. So these help you target more reliable sources, and these are things you would add into your search bar in addition to what your question is. This is a lot of information, so I will go through and really quickly explain it. The first line, .gov, U.S. government data. You can do this, by the way, if you're looking internationally. You would just say Canada.gov, Canada.gov, site.gov, Canada. You can specify it if you need to look. U.S. government data is great for policy. It's great for law. It's generally one of the more reliable sources. You may see certain things adjust. I don't want to get into it because but if you're looking for a really great one, the United States Library of Congress. Their site is not user-friendly at all, in my opinion, but it has so much good stuff. I really recommend it. edu.edu, site:/.edu. Academic, peer-reviewed papers. Do I need to say more? Health-related studying. I see this a lot when I'm looking at ORs or entrepreneurship, specifically innovation plans. NLM, NCBI, these are going to bring you to government-related health organizations, but they are really great. Generally, they'll also link you back to EDU sites, which means you'll find peer-reviewed papers. Be aware that health-related studying, there's going to be a lot of really complicated abstracts. You might be able to look up NLM simplified in your question, and that sometimes pulls up passion projects where people have gone through and they've made it, more friendly for the layman to read. And not or, these are all Boolean searches. They're going to help you narrow down your search. So for example, if I said ADHD and apps, it's not going to give me things that might talk about just ADHD or might just talk about apps. It's going to give me search results that shows both. Or, for example, if you're looking at ADHD game, or you're looking at ADHD apps, not games. That means it's going to exclude anything with a gamification element. When we're talking about ADHD or apps, it will include things that either only focus on ADHD or only focus on apps. The asterisk. You're going to see this when you're looking for variations on a word or a phrase. This will be useful if there's a bunch of different, for example, if you looked up Democrat with an asterisk, it would probably do democracy, Democrats, Democratic. Just the first word that popped into mind. Variations can be useful. You'll generally see this when you're looking at market trends, you're looking at jargon, you're looking at things that you don't know what else to be looking for, so you need a helping hand. And then finally, before and after, this would actually be before semicolon date or after semicolon date. This is useful for making sure that your results are timely. Anything before 2013, for example, is that really what you want to be citing when you could be citing something from 2024, 2025, a little bit more relevant? Additionally, you can use quotation marks to search up exact phrases. For example, if I looked up quotation ADHD executive function and quotation versus just ADHD, I'm going to get results that have in the title ADHD executive function. Make sure you are bookmarking every tab you open. If you're anything like me, you probably open 15 tabs and think, I'm going to come back to these. I'm good. Spoiler, you're not going to. Save bookmarks for everything that can be useful. In fact, I recommend just having a bookmark folder so it's easier later at the end when you're done with your project to just export it all and print it for future use or to just delete it all in one go. Additionally, some great specific sites to start if you're doing research would be Google Scholar, Statista, or Pew Research. I also know that a lot of school districts will have free of charge access to things like Britannica. I'm trying to think of some other ones. I think Britannica is the main one that in Washington I've been exposed to. And those are always useful. Those are a little bit more censored. They may not have the more updated things. They're things that have gone through the process and have been approved to be released to students. So there's a note on that. One source is never enough. That stat that says 80% of students struggle with productivity tools. Great, awesome, I love that stat, but where did it come from? Who surveyed it? When? We always want to be looking for reliability, actionability, relevancy, and without those three main points, those evidence pieces are not good enough to include. They will not hold up under scrutiny. So if you're going to make an argument, you better back it up with something solid. And no offense to blogspot.com, but if your strongest source is a 2013 Tumblr post that ends in source, trust me bro, your credibility is tanking. Hard. So how do we spot a credible source, or at the very least, how do we avoid getting misled by ones that look legit at first glance, especially in this grand old day of AI, when it's so hard to test for validity, it's so hard to understand, is what I'm reading accurate, or are they trying to mislead me? Thankfully, we have something that can help us. Credibility is built off of 5 main principles, and don't laugh, but there's an actually pretty widely used method to test it. And that is the CRAP method, which stands for currency, relevancy, authority, accuracy, and purpose. I have this, actually, I have a little bookmark that says CRAP, and that has like all of the little things to look for. It's my little cheat sheet. It's a massive bookmark. It's basically a page. So, currency is looking at your timeline. Once again, 2013 Tumblr post is not timely. A 2025 Tumblr post, while not being credible, is at least more current. Though honestly, who's posting on Tumblr in 2025? Relevancy is thinking about how well the information relates to your topic or questions. If we're studying ADHD in education, if we see a blog talking about ADHD in theme parks, that's not relevant. It's also probably not credible because it's a blog, and that's because of authority. Authority is asking about the source. Is the author qualified to speak on the matter? For example, we should probably be more inclined to trust a physician on, for example, NLM, that government-backed website, than a blog about health. Or, for example, there are certain formats that have more authority. A blog versus a government post. The news media versus a TikTok reel. Anything like that. Wait, does TikTok have reels or they just have videos? Or whatever. Accuracy is how truthful and correct the information is. Is it citing its sources? Is it offering facts that are checkable? Are there studies that debunks what it says? And finally, we have purpose. Does the source have any ulterior motives? Are they trying to persuade you? Are they trying to sell something to you? I've noticed, especially with AI in the last few months, that there will be a lot of articles that show up suggested for some reason, because I keep my data turned off, so I don't get the curated reels or curated feed on my news. And they disguise specifically health things, talking about the benefits of certain supplements, or they're talking about the benefits of certain vitamins. And at the end, they've used AI to create this amalgamation of word salad-esque terms to make you feel like there's science that backs it up. So just, obviously, right now it's super easy to tell where they're doing that, but in the future, citations and sources are going to be so much more important because AI is getting better at making it seem like something is credible. So, does it pass the sniff test? Does it smell like crap? Sometimes a website is going to look trustworthy. I have a checklist though. So let's go over the green flags first. Is the writing neutral, or is it using emotional or sensational language? There is this very fascinating source out there, and it updates annually, and I believe it's either run by a nonprofit or a watchdog organization. I don't remember. And what it does is it ranks based on bias and neutrality politically the main United States media outlets. And I will link it in the video description because I totally forget what it's called off the top of my head. But it's fascinating. It's just a simple grid. It's an axis grid. And you can see where they might range from further far left leaning to far right leaning. And the vertical axis is mostly or entirely factual or propaganda. Or I think it's misinformation is how they phrase it. I'll link it. But emotional and sensational language is getting harder to look for. This isn't just AI, it's just also how evolutionarily language adapts over time. And if you have not yet learned about whistleblower words, they could also be called dog whistle words, it is very interesting and it's worth looking into. It's a little too political for me to be talking about it on a Go for Glass platform, but especially when you are doing research into market trends, you see companies or people who have been paid to produce resource, and they might twist the way that they present findings. It might be totally accurate the way that they're presenting it, but the words that they use twist the meaning or the perception. So, credibility. Is there a neutral tone? Does it cite? I mean, this is so basic, but are the claims backed up with citations and data? A lot of the times, we want a minimum of one citation out. Or, if it's just doing in-text citations, that's not as great, but you can go and you can take that extra step of making sure it's properly cited elsewhere. Does the author have expertise on the topic? I don't know about you. I have gotten to the point when I'm consuming media, whether that be news or entertainment or anything, where if the person doesn't have a digital presence of some kind, this could be a LinkedIn, it could be social media, something like that, where I can kind of look at their life story and gut check if they are someone I trust to inform me. If they don't have a digital portfolio, I sort of disregard it. It's not a great habit because it does mean that people who are just getting started out don't have as much credence in my mind. But especially when you are young, when you are creating a project that will be used as a resume boost, as something that will follow you, be aggressively cautious. Can you find that same claim in 2 to 3 other trusted places? Very recently, there was flooding. I believe it was down in Texas. And someone on social media released a slightly misleading statement. They said that a couple children had been found up in a tree. Earlier in the week, there had been some children that went missing. The way that this post had phrased it, it made it sound like the children that had gone missing were found alive. It may not have even been on the original poster. They may not even thought about it, that it would have been interpreted that way, but it got picked up by a lot of other larger accounts. And that was spread really quickly. And it ended up coming out that it was misinformation. Whether or not it was intentional or not, it doesn't matter. So when we're talking about corroboration, reputable sources is one of the biggest ways to gut check. Even if it's all over social media, or it's in YouTube, or it's in, blogs. It doesn't make it true. The news, peer-reviewed articles, that's the easiest place to start. We see this a lot when we're talking about trends in markets, consumer shifts. I read a very fascinating article just this morning about how Gen Z has been sort of put into this box by many people in the data analysis sector, specifically talking about consumers and how they interact with brands, purchasing power, all of that. And how brands are starting to realize that the way they've been approaching Gen Z is actually not working. So it was very fascinating. And the reason I bring that up is because it's so easy to think that something that's been repeated again and again and again is credible. Don't fall into that trap. I had way too many students approach me and they come with a claim or they come with a piece of their argument and I fact check it and I tell them, I'm sorry, this is not coming from a credible source. So I sound like a broken record, but your source needs to be credible. My project from ICDC, I still have it on my resume. I make sure that the sources are still credible. I make sure that nothing has been debunked. The second anything on that project is debunked, I'm probably going to take it down because at that point, it won't have been fully credible. Anyway, let's talk about the red flags. Because sometimes it can look trustworthy. It's got like all of the green flags or it's got no flags. You're just looking at it and you're like, I can't tell. I'm still on the fence. First of all, is there an author or a date? If there's no author or a date, that means they're not willing to stake their reputation on it. At that point, just immediately disregard it. This kind of goes for anonymous things as well. Even if someone says, I'm a professor, but I'm staying quiet because I'm worried about my job, or if they're saying something like, I'm an astrophysicist, I've studied this. If there's not an author, if there's not a date, just disregard it. It's not gonna survive inspection. Broken links or no citations. Honestly, broken links, you can use the Wayback Machine, which by the way, if you've never used that before, that's awesome. You can generally use the Wayback Machine to track it. There are some people that include broken links specifically because they know most readers will not take that extra step. Sometimes broken links will take you to the Rickroll video on YouTube, which I think is really funny. But yeah, if there's no citations, once again, disregard it. But if there's broken links, just throw it through the Wayback Machine. If it's something that seems like it would really support your argument, just check it. Maybe it works and they're just not updating their links. Poor grammar. We are seeing this a lot more with AI usage in writing news articles, new reports, abstracts, papers, all of this stuff. Contradictions also kind of plays into this. Humans, we contradict ourselves as we speak, as we type, as we write, but poor grammar can generally indicate that there's a lack of editorial standards or peer reviewing going on, and that is just not a good thing. Once again, the sensational language. It's so important. I brought it up twice. Sensationalizing your language, it's really important to stay up to date on what whistle terms will be cueing what else. So if you don't know where to start, because I have sufficiently scared you, I've made it seem like nothing on the internet can be trusted, here are some basic high trust domains or sources to start. Academic journals are the gold standard. We love them. Google Scholar is your best friend. .gov.edu. This is like academic journals, but they are generally could be nonprofit as a result, so they won't have that paywall. These are backed by data, backed by research. Once again, .gov can talk about policy, law, stuff like that. We love Library of Congress. Industry white papers are useful for market trends, but industry white papers can have bias because nobody wants to be in an industry that is doing something unethical, to give an extreme example. For example, the tobacco industry pushed really hard against the mandatory federal, I think it's federal, the mandatory disclaimer that smoking is bad for you. And they had all these white papers and all these studies that they released that, oh no, it was external, it's external problems causing these. That's an extreme example. We still see things like that today, so just be aware. White papers are great because they can have citations at the very end that can direct you to places where they got their data, but don't take a white paper at its face value immediately. AMA, WHO, APA, Pew, oh, that rhymes, I didn't notice that. These are all great. These are professional organizations who are known for like a nonprofit stanced data distribution model. They typically follow a very strict internal guideline, policy, whatever, in order to ensure that everything's credible because their reputation stakes on it. So there's that. And then finally is respected media outlets. This is like Reuters, Harvard Business Review, NPR, PBS. Still evaluate every single article you come across. You're looking for ones that are relatively middle of the political spectrum, because that way they're not going to have maybe special interests funding it. And you're looking for ones that are not really low on that misinformation rating. You know, you want ones that have a high credibility rating. A quick trick that I typically use is when I'm searching on Google and I'm doing a research thing, I hit tools, time, and then past year, and that helps me filter for the newer sources because it helps me avoid that trap of finding something from 2010. I really love it. I fall in love. I've got this argument like building in my brain, and then I realize it doesn't apply. So clearing something up. Citations are not just for your English teacher or the bibliography section that you're going to throw together at 2 a.m. before you have to submit, which you shouldn't do, by the way. In the real world, knowing how to track and credit your sources is going to build trust and protect your credibility. I'm not saying you're going to be challenged in the workplace to constantly provide your sources. They're not going to want receipts 24/7. However, you never want to be left standing with no backup. I don't know what the future holds with AI. I don't know what the future holds with data privacy or communications online. I can't forecast that. I'm not a mind reader. But it has become so much more important, even in just the last few years, to be honest, to have integrity. This is overkill for me, but if I am taking a final online for a class, depending on the class, like, it depends on the class. Sometimes it would actually break the system. But, for example, I wrote my business law final essay for one of my college classes. And this teacher had a really clear no cheating policy. And I don't cheat. I love work. It's kind of embarrassing how much I love working. And I didn't think that there was going to be an issue. However, just to be safe, I screen recorded my screen the entire time. It's on a USB somewhere here. There's a downloaded video file. It's like 3 videos, each of them being over an hour long. And it's on a USB file, or like a USB stick. That's overkill, but that's just because that teacher had a very clear policy that they would immediately fail your final, and like you could fail the class, and I was being cautious. In academia, it's good to get into the habit, and while you may not need to do a video recording every single time, you don't want to be left standing with no proof, because maybe you're fully innocent, and you want to be able to prove that. So, in DECA, the first thing we have to do when we're citationing anything is figuring out what consistent format we want to use. DECA papers I've seen primarily use APA or MLA, though I know most of the mentors that I've talked to have a preference towards APA since it's what we use most frequently in business, or at least in the business that I've been in. And while it's amazing to cite as you go, I do really recommend grabbing permalinks for all sources. And additionally, if you're running surveys or conducting interviews, those count as sources as well and need to be cited. For surveys, we can generally follow this format. Survey of insert number, participants, insert your location or platform of strengths, conducted by, the date, by who conducted it. So for example, I could say there was a survey of 24 DECA students, July 25th, by Gopher Glass. I might even go so far as to say, by Lorelei R. on behalf of Gopher Glass. And this, by the way, is just a basic citation model that fits for both APA and MLA. You'll have to rewrite it to fit them perfectly, but just do this as you go. As well as for interviews, pretty much the same. It's interview with name of interviewee, brief descriptor, conducted, date. Interview with Lorelei R. Gopher Glass, July 2025. I should have added the brief descriptor. Looks like it got briefly deleted. But we might have said this was something like interview with Lorelei R., mentoring cert program, Gopher Glass, conducted July 2025. You can cut the little things like conducted by or whatever. I just prefer them because they look nice. So, one of the things I did want to point out with interviews is when you're running multiple interviews, you don't always need to name every participant unless you get explicit permission. It's a little ethical tightrope you have to walk. And in fact, sometimes it might be more ethical to not cite all names and to summarize by groups. For example, here, 5 interviews with high school seniors who dropped out of DECA competitive events, June through July 2025. This has the potential to be perceived as damaging. Nobody wants to admit they dropped out of DECA competitive events, or they dropped out of DECA, or they dropped out of high school, or these people smoke when they're not supposed to, or these people jaywalk. No one wants to admit to that. So sometimes it's just more ethical to respect implied consent and not share it. Okay. Risk management. I go over brain vaults and I go over single source of truth in the risk and quality management video, but I'm going to reiterate here. This is something most people skip. I swear by it. When you save a source for future analysis, jot down why you trust it. This can be as simple as it cited 3 academic sources, it matches a similar Pew Research claim, and it's published by an edtech analyst firm. This is going to help you so much in the future when you're deciding what to analyze. And additionally, if you see anything that makes it a little bit skewed, record that as well. For example, it uses slightly outdated data, but it's still useful for background information, but I should find a more current source to build off of. Once again, going back to that idea of integrity and honesty, it'll also help you later if a judge or an advisor is going to challenge that source, and you have to explain why it earned a spot in your project. Obviously, those things that have the skew, you're going to want to take those out. But at the end, if you can say, there are slight skews, however, later I found this other source that actually validates it. So that whole outdated data, I found it reiterated in a 2025 paper. So this 2019 paper that I included is in fact relevant and timely. So that is everything for executing research. I hope that was helpful. I was a little bit yappy. Thank you so much for supporting us, and I will see you around.